Welcome to First Amendment Voices National Symposium this year. It's virtual for our second year in a row. And this year's theme is depolarization, finding common ground. And I'm really excited. We started off the week with a difficult conversations workshop this morning, which is always a great way to start a conversation about depolarization. But this particular workshop is the start of a series of features around the role of different leaders and their voices in efforts to depolarize communities or possibly even a nation writ large. So I'm just super grateful to be able to introduce our veterans panel as the first program in that series. And we have just some amazing speakers who are on this panel, and I'm really excited to share them with you. I want to thank our audience for joining us today live. I also want to thank our volunteers who enable us to do our programming, and specifically call out our sponsor for this panel in particular, Veterans for American Ideals. And you'll hear a little bit more of that from Chris Purdy, one of the speakers, but also our sponsor this morning, Ursula Inc., who sponsored a Difficult Conversations workshop that went this morning, and the second part will be tomorrow. And Ursula also sponsored the role of women in depolarization panel discussion that goes on tomorrow. There's a lot of other programming up on our website. I'd encourage you to go there and check it out if you're interested. It's going to be really cool, because beyond that, we're looking at the role of the media. We're looking at what role social media plays in depolarization, as well as students and faculty on college campuses. So there's a lot to explore over this coming week. And if you know people who haven't had a chance to be here live, but they really wanted to, don't worry. We've got a YouTube channel, and this program will be produced and up on the YouTube channel in the next 24 to 48 hours. I see Sydney dropped in the chat function, the website for the symposium. So feel free to go there if you want to check out our other programming. Sydney, if you could also drop in the YouTube channel, and that way people can stay up to date. If you just click subscribe on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see any of the programs that come out once they're produced. So this is a really exciting panel discussion for me. I was mentioning as we were chatting beforehand that there's a personal relationship here with each one of these speakers. And I just feel really grateful, number one, that they're willing to be here and share their experiences with you around this topic of what role veterans play in depolarization. But who better to lead that conversation than Janessa Gans-Wilder, who not only spent time in Iraq during the conflict with the CIA, but then realized that her calling was more toward the depolarizing space, and she started the Euphrates Institute, and is the person who introduced me to Difficult Conversations and the amazing Kern Berry. So I'm really excited. I'm going to turn it over to you, Janessa, and I will drop off camera.
Great. And Steve, before you go, we're just so grateful for your putting together this whole symposium in the midst of all that you're doing. I don't know if you all know, but he's working around the clock on evacuating Afghan refugees and lobbying for this issue in Washington. And so it's just such a huge privilege and honor that you're also putting on these forums and symposium for all of us to enjoy. So thank you, Steve, so much. And thank you to our panelists for being here. Thank you to the audience members. This is such a wonderful topic that we're going to engage in today. And just the topic, obviously, of depolarization is so relevant and vital to our country and the world right now as we look out there at all the issues that polarize us. But also the timing is impeccable. Tomorrow is the International Day of Peace, a United Nations recognized day. Millions of people around the world will be practicing peace, choosing peace. I love these words from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres he said, our world faces a stark choice, peace or perpetual peril, and that we must choose peace. It's the only option to repair our broken world. So we might not think of veterans, those who fought in wars, as natural peace builders. And yet it's perhaps those who have served in armed conflict who have a true perspective on the perils of the path of polarization and where that can lead us and where that can take us. So it's just a wonderful group that we have here today. All three of our panelists have served in the Iraq War, and all three are very involved with refugees from those wars, which is a very polarizing topic for sure, and one that we will get into today. We have an amazing lineup. As Steve mentioned, we have Chris Purdy, Director of Veterans for American Ideals, Matti, an Iraq War veteran and author of 3 books on that topic, and Ronnie, who worked as an interpreter in Iraq, got a special visa, came to the US, immediately turned around, joined the US military, and went back to Iraq to serve. So there's so much to get into with his story. I want to tell you the brief flow for our time together today. So I will be in conversation with each of our speakers for about half of our time. And then 45 minutes in, we really want to engage with you all. So you are welcome to put your comments, your questions in the Q&A spot. If you look in your bottom right-hand corner, there's a little Q&A button. You can start populating them at any point. If something comes to you and you want to put it in there, you can. Otherwise, you can wait until the Q&A portion, which is about 45 minutes in. We definitely want you to be able to engage directly with these wonderful folks. So that is our brief flow. And what we're going to do is we'll start with Chris, and then we'll go to Amanda and Ronnie, and I'll introduce each of them as we go along. And so Chris, I want to start with you as the Director of Veterans for American Ideals and Outreach at Human Rights First. And you've been doing that since 2016. You've worked hard to build veteran and community relationships across the Southeast from your home in Atlanta. You served for 8 years in the Army National Guard, including being deployed to Iraq in 2011. And you have a background in sociology and education. But lately, the past few months, you've been working around the clock, leading a task force on evacuating Afghan refugees, which, as I mentioned, is a very polarizing topic. Basically, whether or not to let these folks in, are they a threat? Do we owe them something, having been involved so long and engaged over there? And so I just want to ask maybe some background. What has been your experience within the veteran community working on this issue, and maybe reactions from outside the veteran community?
Yeah, thanks, Janessa, and thanks, Steve, for putting this on. I have come to at least one of these before in person, and it's just I'm so grateful to be here with some great panelists here today. So, yeah, as you mentioned, over the past few months, we've been working at Vets for American Ideals to come up with a plan to evacuate Afghans who serve alongside American forces. We recognized at the very beginning of the withdrawal announcement back in April that this was a gaping plan. And so we immediately got a coalition of veterans together who would be interested in pushing a plan to get those folks out of the country in the event that the Afghan government collapsed. And unfortunately, as we saw over the past month, that is exactly what happened. But what struck me about this plan at the very beginning, our plan was to bring these people to Guam, following the historical precedent of the Vietnam War, of refugees who were evacuated from Iraq and Kosovo. And what struck me was that when we started asking around to veterans organizations saying, hey, would you be interested in kind of signing on to this plan, this very niche immigration plan that had all sorts of words like parole and different types of visas, veterans groups across the political spectrum dropped what they were doing, and they said, yes, we're all in. I mean, we had groups from the far right funded Koch brothers veterans organizations to far left organizations that were very critical of the Trump administration, all sign letters, all do advocacy together. And it was really a broad issue. And I should say everyone in between, including larger groups like the VFW, for example. So it was always clear to me in this latest iteration of the advocacy on this issue that veterans were willing to drop everything, and really they cared deeply about this. It was not a surprise. You know, as you mentioned, I started out in Vets for American Ideals as a volunteer back in 2016. And the very first fly-in or convening that I went to in the winter of 2017, I was very pleasantly surprised to see Republican Trump supporting veterans right alongside, left-leaning Bernie Sanders supporting veterans, all working together on this one issue. So that is a through line. That is not a new thing. This has been a coalition that is deep and long lasting and broad, and it really it gives me a lot of hope, because I think, when we look at our country today, it's very easy to say that we're more divided than ever. And I suppose you could point to the Civil War as a time when we were more divided than today. But we can also look at this instance of supporting refugees, and specifically supporting refugees who have left the country after fighting alongside American forces. That's something that we can all agree on, and that's a starting point. And I think it's really important to identify that as a starting point, and then move on to other issues that we agree upon. So. Yeah.
I'm looking for a quote, Chris, that I really liked that you said. Where is it? Oh, I maybe lost it. It was something about those who. I lost it. Something about those folks who served. Because of basically these wars were because of our involvement, and so we should and be welcoming them back in the US. Can you say a little bit about more about is it this just Iraq and Afghanistan specifically that you're seeing that the veterans are coming together along, or is it other issues?
Sure. So I think you could point to anything in the global war on terror and the subsequent effects of that, where veterans are going to be engaged on that issue. Certainly, we need to take special care to the refugees of Iraq and Afghanistan, because we caused that to happen. Those people would not be displaced if it weren't for us. And I think that there's a broad recognition in the veteran community on that. So a lot of your viewers might have participated in some of these evacuation efforts, or at least been tangentially aware of it. And a lot of this has been done over Signal Thread, which is an encrypted messaging app that allows you to group people together, similar to iMessaging or Facebook Messenger or something like that. And I'll never forget. I was it was late at night in the throes of all the Afghan evacuation efforts, and I keep seeing this name that popped up in one of these threads, and I said, I know this guy. Like, I know who he is. And then I he had a pseudonym on his number. And so I looked up the number in my own contact history, and it was a guy who I went to Iraq with, who was a right-wing guy from South Boston, as red as they get. And I mean, my political views are not aligned, particularly with his. And we had a lot of arguments on Facebook over the years over this or that or another thing. But there he was, organizing people to saying, hey, yeah, you've got to get these SIVs or these refugees through this checkpoint, and this is the things you have to say there, and these is the documentation. And I couldn't have been more proud of him in that moment. And we connected afterwards, and I just found in him this real desire to fix this issue of these people who fought alongside us and who served alongside us. And if you'd have told me a year ago that Donnie from South Boston was going to be enmeshed in immigration issues, I would have said you're out of your mind. But then the next day, he's adding me to these other Signal threads of people who need resettlement advice, and how do we get them kind of hooked up when they're at home. And it's really inspiring. But it does come back to the shared value that we all have as veterans, to take care of the people who serve alongside us. And I think what we do at Vets for American Ideals is we try to take that shared sense of purpose and build consensus around that, and then start applying it to other areas. So we can start saying, okay, well, if we care about these refugees and these Afghan SIVs, then we need to start looking at other people who are displaced and start thinking, what are the connections between these two groups? And if we care so much about the Afghans, why should we not then care about, for example, the Haitians that are coming, that are in need right now on the southwest border, or other groups? So that's our goal, really.
That's fascinating, Chris. And do you notice that there is some momentum building around that, or is this just in the nascent stages that you're seeing that veterans are coming around the issues of the refugees from Afghanistan, especially? That's been in all of our thought, and I know you've been leading this task force, enmeshed in this. I'd love to hear some of your stories of how people are, what you're seeing on the Afghan refugee thing specifically, and then also maybe we can get to, could this potentially, are you primed to broaden this coalition on other issues, or is it really just in the nascent stages and people are sort of reconnecting with each other, remembering, oh yes, we do have this common bond as veterans. It doesn't matter what our political views are. We can come, we can unite on this one issue, and then maybe tentatively you can branch out.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm on calls all the time with people who are trying to explain to immigration experts various immigration things, right? Like humanitarian parole. We were on a call a couple days ago where someone was trying to explain to like a legitimate humanitarian parole expert what humanitarian parole is. And if I don't want to get into it because I'm going to embarrass myself, but the whole point of that is to say that people are taking a real issue or a real look into the immigration system, and they're realizing that it's screwed up. I was on a text thread today where someone said, well, wait, this thing is just happened, and that means they'll get benefits or they won't get benefits. And it's like, yeah, this is an issue. We need to solve our immigration system, because people don't understand. If they're never confronted with the realities of our immigration system, they don't feel the need to really dig deep and engage on that. And so I'm very hopeful and optimistic that throughout the coming months, as people start understanding, what it means to be resettled through various statuses, and what it means to go through the immigration system to different locations where they may or may not have the same benefits as they would in other places, that people are going to be justifiably upset, and they're going to call for real change. And you're already seeing it right now. We released a letter signed by about 30 other veterans organizations on Friday, calling for very specific immigration fixes to the SIV or the refugee process. So I think there's a long way to go here. There's quite a long tail that the veteran community can work off. And I think one point I also want to say is veterans are going to be really critical in pushing back against any backlash that we're seeing. So when we see on in certain media outlets anti-refugee or nativist language, the veteran voice is really critical there. And so ensuring that we're engaging them throughout every step of the process, so that they're primed to then speak out and say, no, that's not who we are as a country. We're a welcoming country. I think that's really important.
Chris, can I ask, how did this become personal for you? Was it your deployment in Iraq? Does it go beyond that or before that? What's a little bit of your story?
Sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, I was deployed to Iraq in 2011, and I saw how that withdrawal. I was there at the very end. I was part of the last combat brigade that left the country, and I at that time I thought that this withdrawal couldn't go any worse, and I was sadly mistaken. And I came home and I met Kirk Johnson, who is the author of the List Project, or To Be a Friend is Fatal, excuse me, it's a book. And he outlines the SIV process and the debt that is owed to the Iraqi interpreters. And it really kind of struck me that this was something that I needed to get engaged on. And until that point, I had never seen immigration and veterans issues as being aligned. I'm the son of an immigrant. I'm the son of a family that had to flee Belfast in Northern Ireland due to the troubles there and the civil war that happened. And so it was always very clear to me how important migration was to this country and to my own personal experience. It's very real when your family grows up and teaching you about this other place that they were forced to leave, or at the very least were made to feel unwelcome to the point where they had to leave. And I was able to see a lot of my experience in those people who were displaced because of conflict, especially conflict that the United States had been engaged in. So when I was given the opportunity to become a volunteer in 2016, I just jumped at it, and I've been with this program ever since.
Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing your personal story, and especially for the work that you're doing now, and and being an advocate for these issues. It's so critical at this time, and for helping to educate us even in coming here today. So I want to turn now to Amanda Matti, who served 6 years in the Navy as an intelligence analyst and is an Iraq War veteran. She's the author of 3 books: her Iraq War memoir that tells the story of her 2005 deployment. Mandy, maybe we overlapped, to Baghdad, where she met her husband, an Iraqi national who served as her translator. Then her second book tells her husband's story of working as an interpreter for US forces in Iraq. And the latest book is a novel about a female CIA analyst who poses as a journalist to infiltrate a terrorist organization in Iraq. And that just came out, which I'm excited to read. Amanda lives in San Diego with her husband, Fadi, and their 2 daughters. And Amanda, you've also been very involved in the task force for Afghan refugees and have been a voice just through your writing and your speaking for humanizing the other, especially given the perspective with your husband. So I would love to ask you, what role does being a veteran give you in terms of political polarization, and what have you seen as polarizing even in your own experience?
Well, I've dealt with a lot of polarized issues. Obviously, I think we all have found ourselves as veterans, whether it be at Thanksgiving dinner or in a more public and official setting. And we as veterans are in a unique position to where we do kind of have the ear of both sides, of people on both sides of the political spectrum. As Chris said, clear different sides of the political spectrum. They still, thankfully, respect us. They respect our service. It's been nothing but, always both sides. Thank you for your service. Thank you for what you've done. So we are in a unique position to be a voice of depolarization. And not only are we in a unique position, and I think most veterans would agree with me, we kind of have an obligation and a responsibility. Of course, we've taken off the uniform, but we all know even when we take off the uniform, those obligations and those responsibilities remain for a lifetime. And we do feel that we need to step up and be kind of that voice of, the common ground, or the uniting voice. And we have dealt with that. I know I've dealt with that in multiple instances, especially being married to an Iraqi that I met in a war zone. I remember when I released my first book, which tells the story of my time in Iraq and meeting my husband. As soon as I released that book, I was reached out to by multiple organizations. Hey, we'd love for you to come speak about your book, do a book signing at our group or our meetings or something like that around San Diego and around El Cajon, where I live, which has a huge Iraqi refugee population here in El Cajon. And one of the groups that reached out to me in the very beginning was quite a conservative group. I believe they were actually one of the original Tea Party groups in our area. And so I was a little surprised, but I was very excited. I was like, well, this is great. This is a great sign. I'm really excited to go speak for this group. And so I got to their little meeting and they said, oh, well, the first half of the meeting was going to be our regular monthly meeting. And the second half, you can get up and do your presentation and, tell us about your book. And I'm sitting in the audience, and the entire first half of the meeting was them talking about how fearful they were of this new wave of immigrants from the Middle East who were all Muslim. They were coming in at that time from Syria because of the civil war. Lots of Afghan immigrants were coming into the community. Since we had the original Iraqi population here, our community was already poised to kind of welcome new refugees. So the resettlement communities were sending them again to our town. They were talking about in the meeting how they were okay with the Iraqi refugees because most of them had been Christians that were being resettled, but the new wave were all, Muslims coming in, and it was just a half an hour of what are we going to do, and what's this going to mean for our schools, and how is this going to affect our community, and there's going to be more Muslims in my child's classroom than Americans, and it was just, and I'm sitting there going, I am in the lion's den. How did I end up here? But as they spoke on, it was just a lot of fear and a lot of this, negative rhetoric. And then, of course, they all looked at me and said, well, now let's welcome our today's guest speaker, Matti, who just got, served in Iraq and is a veteran. And we honor her, and they gave me the big round of applause. And she's going to come up here and talk about her time and the book that she wrote about her time in Iraq and how she met her Marine husband. So then it hit me that they thought that my book was about me meeting an American Marine in Iraq and us falling in love and later getting married. They didn't realize that it was an Iraqi who had worked for the Marines, who I had met and married and had brought here to the US as an immigrant. So I was 1 second thinking, how do I sneak out the back door? But then the next minute I said, I'm really in a unique position right now. I'm here for a reason. And I have a huge opportunity in front of me, and I should really jump on this. So I got up, went up, did the presentation I had planned already, that I was, talking about my Iraqi husband, how he had been my interpreter, how he had served shoulder to shoulder with Marines, how he had been injured in combat, how he had protected people, how I was probably alive because of the cultural advising he had given our team, and how he wasn't unique, how he wasn't one in a million, that there were thousands of Iraqis and Afghans who had stepped up to offer their help and their service to assist American military troops on the ground, to serve as cultural advisors to American companies, and how a lot of American service members were alive today because of their service. And now, because of threats that they're receiving in their country, because of their service to us, they're being forced to flee. And those are who is resettling in your community right now. And veterans like myself and others are not only assisting them in getting here, but once they're here, I talked about the volunteer opportunities that we do. I was working with No One Left Behind at the time and helping these newly arrived SIVs integrate into the communities, helping their kids get enrolled in school, taking them on trips to the beaches because they didn't have cars yet, helping get furniture for their apartments because the resettlement agencies didn't have enough money to even furnish their apartments, and how we were just veterans in your community, we're doing this. And then at the end of my presentation to that group, of course, they were all dead silent, and I was ready to have, things thrown at me. They actually stood up and they started handing me business cards. My husband owns a hardware store. We would love to hire them. My family owns a grocery store down, in La Mesa. We'd love we have openings. We'd love to get them hired. My daughter is a tutor. If the wives want to learn English, my daughter would love to tutor them. And it was amazing how everything had just flipped. And I think a big sticking point too wasn't that I had gotten up and said, well, you're wrong, and I'm gonna counter everything you're saying, and this is why you're wrong. They knew that the presentation I had walked in there with was something that I had prepared before I even came in, and they understood the miscommunication. And when I just got up and just continued, this was what I was already gonna say. I wasn't gonna tell them they were wrong or anything like that. I'm just gonna say, well, here's my experience. Here's what I personally know, and I'm going to share that with you. And I think that really helped to kind of diffuse the negative rhetoric that was going on.
Such an amazing story, Amanda, and how you continue to share, the personal story is so key, whether it's through your writing, through going out and speaking. And I know we're going to hear from someone just in that position, Ronnie, next. But what have you found, and this relates to you too, Chris, although you can answer later, about what are the ways that you have found that you can see, witness the depolarization. Is it for you sharing the personal story and that how people connect to you? Or is it being a veteran, people connect to a sense of service? Or, what is it that allows you to have that common ground perspective and bring that so that people will hear you?
I've noticed in my experience that it is kind of a step-by-step process. The first step is, oh, I'm a veteran. They respect and they actually will listen to me talk. So just them being willing to listen to somebody speak is step one. And then they understand that, I'm a veteran and I know I have been in country. I have been shot at by Iraqis, and I have also had tea and chai and broken bread and been welcomed into homes. So it kind of makes it to where they no longer, it's not just Iraqi people. They understand that these are humans and you can't group everybody together. Oh, all Iraqis are terrorists, all Muslims are terrorists. They understand, when you can finally kind of break that down and humanize the other side and humanize what's going on, then they're like, oh, really? And then you can then tell them your personal experiences and your personal stories about, oh, I went and had, dinner with this couple, in Iraq when we were out on a civil affairs mission and this happened, and just that right there. And then the fact that even in our community, we are welcoming refugees and Muslim refugees. I then invite them, hey, we're going to have a get together at Starbucks, with some of the new SIVs that have arrived. You're welcome to come in and join us. And you'll notice, they'll come in and they'll have coffee. There'll be a little, we're going to sit over here, but it's like I said, like that step-by-step process and being kind of the person that's there. They trust you, both sides trust you as a veteran, both sides trust you. You are able to then kind of bring those two sides together. And then once they get to know each other, I mean, even with my own family, when they found out that I was marrying an Iraqi from Iraq, when I came back from my deployment, they were just, oh my gosh, he's going to beat you. And if you have kids, he's going to steal them and run away and from the country. And it was a year before he got here. So it was a year of my family hammering me with, please don't bring him here. Please don't marry this man. They had a year before I finally was able to bring him here and they could meet him. And literally within 10 minutes, it was a year of don't marry this man. And within 10 minutes, oh, he's so wonderful. We love him. And honestly, it takes 10 minutes. It's amazing.
Such a powerful story, Amanda. And thank you as well for all that, it didn't just end there with your marriage and your deployment. It's like that has just allowed you or invited you to engage in this broader way and share your story and help educate others. So thank you for spreading that light. And speaking of stories, we're going to now turn to Ronnie, who is not on camera, and that's not his real name, for his protection. And once you hear a little bit, but we will hear his voice, his story is just incredible. He served as an interpreter for U.S. forces in Iraq for 6 years during the height of sectarian conflict in Baghdad. And I've been enjoying hearing more about his story. He's one of the key people featured in Steve Miska's book, Baghdad Underground Railroad. So if you want to hear more, it's just incredible to see how it played out during those 6 years in the height of the conflict. After numerous setbacks applying for the special immigrant visa, he finally made it to the US, where he immediately enlisted in the US Army. He went through basic training and advanced training and then deployed back to Iraq as an American soldier. In 2011, same as you, Chris, Ronnie departed from Iraq on the last patrol of the US withdrawal. He continues to work in the national security space, keeping us safe from adversaries. Ronnie, I know we could spend hours with you and hearing your story. So, but we also want to talk about the theme of polarization. Can you share a little bit about your story, and then we can get into the climate of polarization and how it's affected you, but would just love to hear in your own words about your amazing story.
Thank you very much, Janessa, and really, I was really amazed with Amanda's story. It's really amazing, and thank you for everyone who's doing all that great work to help those guys who need help. My story is basically I was just a teenager who was happy that Saddam got kicked out, and I was very appreciative of the U.S. forces for doing that. And then I I'm the youngest of my brothers, and back in the wartime, no one was working, so I stepped in and I started working as an interpreter for the U.S. forces, and I spent 6 years doing that, and I applied for my visa, which took for a very long time, and I ended up, making it here, and I already had a plan, so joined the military. Find out that it's, to me personally, not saying like as a soldier your job is easy, but it was kind of easier for me to be a soldier than as an interpreter. There's a way more challenges, and there's way more there's not a lot of clarity of what's going to happen to you as an interpreter versus as a soldier. You have one mission, you have a goal, you have a path, you have leadership. It's very clear. But the other challenging things is when let's say you're leaving the country, you got your visa. It's not easy as well. You're leaving your entire life to save your life, and it's a very, very I would call it the catch-22 situation, because if you stay, you get killed, and if you leave, you're going to the unknown. You don't know nothing about the system over there, so it's a really big challenge, to adapt to the community, to adapt to everything over there. This is pretty much my story, in a very short version of it. But if you have any question as far as like the roles of the veterans in depolarization, so go ahead.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. When I hear about you, Ronnie, I think you defy this narrative of us versus them, of us and them. And so do you sometimes, when you then came to the US and learned of all this political polarization between Americans, it's not just now Americans versus Iraqis or these different cultures, but now even within the US, there's this intense polarization that's in many ways getting worse and worse. What role do you find yourself playing? Do you just shake your head and go, you guys are crazy? Or what's going through your mind as you're encountering the current environment in the US?
So it's I feel like sense of responsibility because of understanding the situation more than the average, I would say, the civilian. As a veteran, you get kind of exposed to what's really going on at the end of the spectrum, and exactly what Amanda was saying is you have kind of understanding of both sides of the spectrum just because of your unique experience. Now, keep in mind, I have to do the same thing when I'm talking to people from the Middle East, whether if they're from Iraq or not, because they are being paralyzed as far as what the US are doing. So I have to do the same thing, but over there in that other world, in the other half of the world is, I have a lot of people who look at me as like, what, how come you joined the army to fight your own people? Or whether I'm not actually fighting my own people. What I did, I helped a lot. I have Americans who look at me the same way. There's a lot of Americans who are not supportive of veterans or military, or the U.S. government, generally speaking, including the military. A lot of people here in the U.S. And when I explained to them, just because of my background as a veteran and as an Iraqi, it kind of make them pause and think about all the misinformation that they've been spoon-fed by the media or the social media, which is very polarized. And then you can see in their faces, they're like, starting questioning everything that they believed in for a while. So I feel that, sense of responsibility because of understanding the situation. And I think I remember when I went to Iraq and I ran into some local interpreters who they were living in a kind of really not very good circumstances, and they didn't have no no one or no plan for their visa paperwork. And I had additional motives, not just because I was, an interpreter or I am Iraqi. It's the additional values that you learn in the military. The one team, one fight, and you're not leaving no one behind. It add that kind of responsibility to you that push you, to step in a situation like this and help, or actually just depolarize the situation and make the people, or explain to the people so they can understand what's going on. I have a lot of, like, for example, the very last major situation with Afghanistan. I have a lot of friends who are born and raised, here locally in Florida, and they were like just watching the scenes of the Afghans trying to clinch against the airplane, and they were like mad at the military, and I'm like, slow down, the military is actually, they're doing, they're giving a lot of sacrifices to actually evacuate, the people from there. And they were like, what about this video? Look at this video. So I was like, okay, I understand. But I showed them a lot of pictures they never seen from Kabul airport of, soldiers helping little children and women and taking care of them. And they're like, it really immediately make them calm down and understand a little bit more. There's like more, it's not as simple as this. There's a lot of details that you will not understand until you go over there or you experience, such a thing. So that's pretty much, and I've seen a lot of soldiers before I even start processing my SIV paperwork. Every time this unit is getting ready to go home, the soldiers who worked with me, you end up having this bond, under harsh and difficult circumstances, when it's like, life or death. You have this kind of bond with those people that they are right next to you in the same foxhole. So a lot of them, they start crying when they leave. Like, I cannot believe we're leaving you guys here. I remember one guy, one of the toughest, humans that I ever seen mentally and physically, Sergeant First Class Garcia. That guy was literally crying when he left, when he finished his tour. He was like, I can't believe we're leaving you here. So you feel that responsibility, on your shoulders the whole time. And that's why, regardless of what your, beliefs and, affiliation as a veteran, when it comes to situation like this, we all have this one thing in our head, activated, is we have to help those people. And that's just for Afghanistan. As far as depolarization, there's a lot of situation, whether it's, political, or other situation. When you step in as a veteran, people have different respect for you. You're kind of more credible, and people kind of, relate to you when you explain to them, because it's lack of understanding and it's misinformation or polarized, information that people are consumed. So once you step in, it's different. And again, that's for the people here in the United States. And also, I personally face that a lot for people, back in the Middle East.
Thank you, Ronnie, so much. It's really moving to hear your story. And, you notice some people who have served, they become jaded. And to hear you after 6 years, then rejoining in a way the Army, going back, and to still be talking about, ideals like no one left behind, that I hear a lot of veterans invoke, talking about our allies and these refugees and people that we worked with, and even then extending beyond that concept of no one. What does it mean that military ethos to leave no one behind. So thank you for making that so personal for us and relevant, and sharing some of your story. I know there's so much more to that. And gratitude for you being here today. And you probably thought, when you got to the US, that was going to be the easy part, but now you're having to educate so many Americans, and sharing your story, I'm sure, is very transformative for anyone who hears it. So I'd love to now engage with our audience members. We have many questions in the Q&A. If you have not put your question in, please do drop it in the Q&A button. Hopefully we can get to a good portion of these, if not all of them. And I'm going to turn to those now, and we'll see who of you wants to answer. Maybe all of you want to take a crack at it. Let's start with this one from Neil. This is wonderful. It's so clear how important the veterans' voice is in this realm. Can you provide ideas for how non-veterans can assist? So would any of you like to take that one on first? Maybe Chris, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. So in this moment, right, with the Afghan crisis, supporting your refugee resettlement agencies in your community is going to be the most critical thing that anyone can do. If they're going to need money, they're going to need clothes, housing, all of that stuff that people need when they first arrive to a country. These folks don't have it. And so the resettlement agencies are there to provide it. So if you want to donate your time, talent, or treasure to anything in your local community, I think that is the best way to go forward. As far as depolarization and talking about using the SIV or the Afghan-Iraqi wars to talk about ways to bridge divides, I think in your conversations with your community members, point to this issue and point to the fact that you have this whole network of veterans and people who've been affected by the wars over the past 20 years coming together on this. Like, we need to draw attention to the fact that this is the most united that certainly the veteran community has been in a long time, but also a lot of other people have been. We don't need, I'll just put my cards on the table. I'm a registered Democrat, but I have a lot of criticism for the Biden administration. But that's not really the point right now. The point is not looking backward, and the point is not looking and saying this president did that or that president should have done this. The point is looking forward in this moment and saying, what can we as a country do to solve this whole of society solution, or whole society problem that requires a whole society solution. So I think that's what we can do as veterans or non-veterans, and is really looking forward to just looking forward. Sorry, I kind of ran away there.
That's super helpful. Does Amanda or Ronnie want to jump in with that one, or should we go to the next question?
I kind of just wanted to add onto what Chris was already saying, because I knew he'd pretty much cover everything, so I let him go. I think it very much is a lead by example here. You can tell somebody why they should care about something literally until you're blue in the face, and you won't get anywhere. But if you tell somebody why you care about something, it's amazing how that gets through a lot faster and has a lot more effect. And when you tell somebody, this is why I care, and this is what I'm doing, and this is how I'm helping or how I'm doing it, that goes a lot further than trying to tell somebody why they should do something or feel some way, because you're not going to get anywhere.
Right. The personal story always makes such an impact, and no one can argue with your own personal experience and story. Okay, here is one from Jenny. How do we counteract the fear that drives anti-immigrant sentiment, and alternately the resentment of the armed forces, without the one-on-one 10-minute presentation, Amanda, that you described? One of the main tenets of citizenship is voting rights. Can a commitment to democracy be the shared value of veterans and citizens with opposing ideologies? So there's a lot in there. How do we counteract that fear? Maybe it is something, Amanda, like you're saying, just get to the personal story, and then can there be this broad commitment to democracy, voting rights as a shared value of veterans? So who would like to jump in on this one?
I'll go ahead first, and then I'm sure Amanda will correct me and not correct me. That's not what I wanted to say. You're gonna do great. Anyways, That was awkward. All right, so what struck me what struck me most about this question is the fifth word in there, fear. This is about, how do we push back against fear? And fear is what drives a lot of our issues in society. Fear of the other, fear of the unknown. When we talk about voting rights, people are afraid that society is changing in a way that they don't know, and so they don't know what that means for them. And so I think the first step in this is acknowledging that fear exists, and we don't have to agree with whether that fear is rational or that fear is justified, but we have to start with this basic understanding that people generally want to do good. They want to do what is best for them and their communities and the people that they care about, and they generally will do the right thing if everything is kind of laid out on the table. And so acknowledging that this fear exists, and trying to have conversations around that, and say, I think as far as voting rights, that is really difficult. But when we talk about immigration, which I think is a lot of people in this call are very or have a lot of expertise on, point out to immigrants that you have in your community, right? Like, I can draw on my family's history as an immigrant family, and say, my family's history is no different than a lot of these people who are coming here. We just happen to look different, and we have different accents and different foods, and that's fine. But if we can just start at that one point of understanding, you can go a long way in driving a wedge in the fear that is causing it.
Amanda or Ronnie, did you want to add to that? Okay, let's go.
Chris's answer was perfect.
It was indeed. Thank you, Chris. What is it about? I'd love to hear from maybe all of you on this one. What is it about veterans that allows unity and collaboration, in contrast to civilian groups who just can't seem to reach a workable consensus about anything nowadays?
Chris?
Amanda, you can go right ahead.
Let's rephrase that question. I expected Chris to take it. I wasn't listening. No.
What is it about? And you touched on this beautifully, Amanda, already in your share, but maybe to go into it a little bit more, what is it about veterans that allows unity and collaboration, in contrast to civilian groups who can't seem to get a workable consensus about anything nowadays?
Well, I mean, of course, veterans are always going to have, as Ronnie had talked about, we're always going to have that bond, no matter what our background or where we came from or anything. We're bonded by our service, and if the government's good at anything, it's that instilling that bond in their military service members, and that bond lasts a lifetime. It goes well beyond our time in service. So we're already kind of poised and kind of already pre-programmed to work together. Even like as Chris had pointed out, him and his colleague from Boston, who are at opposite ends of the political spectrum, are still bonded by their service and are able to speak to each other rationally and respect each other when they speak because of that service. And you're right, that doesn't exist often in the civilian world. And that is why we have such a polarized society right now, is because there are very few things that as Americans are bonding us together right now. I mean, even of course, after 9/11, there was huge anti-Muslim rhetoric, but we were still bonded by the devastation that had happened on 9/11. So we had that to fall back on. Right now, we kind of are just floating. We're fighting. It's, if you don't agree with me, it's not, oh, let's agree to disagree. It's, oh, I want you dead. And it's really, really sad. And there are ways that we're going to have to connect beneath the surface before we can even start repairing the bonds and depolarizing above the surface. So there's multiple things that I think that community organizers have started. I think I'm seeing it just by civilians stepping up and all these grassroots organizations that are popping up to assist with this refugee crisis and on other areas. And it really is, once you've volunteered and done civilian service like that, that bonds you quite similar to military service. And I think that's kind of the key, is just getting involved, encouraging people to get involved, and again, leading by example.
That's great. Thank you, Amanda. And going a bit broader, this is a wonderful question from Carrie. I love this conversation. I love the heart of depolarization. And Ronnie, this is a heads up that I'm going to ask you first to respond. With a warm heart and so much gratitude, I'd love to hear our panelists speak from a veteran point of view about this idea that war is just part of human nature. If you'd like to speak to this, do you feel like depolarization is going against human nature? So Ronnie, what would you say to the idea that war is just part of human nature?
It's going to take me a minute to think about it. This is very deep. I don't think war is a part of human nature, honestly. I think sense of protection is part of human nature, and if there's anything is threatening your family, your country, your group, you're going to go to war to protect that.
Would
So
you
I'm
like
reading.
to say more?
So yeah, I am, because I'm looking at I have to look at it. There's a conversion process that goes in my head for both languages. So I'm looking at the question.
And while you're looking at it, Ronnie, too, you know what came up for me? I remember so many people in Iraq, and even then I'd go to other parts of the Middle East. Oh, those Iraqis, they're by nature violent. They're the lowest of the low. They're just violent by nature. War is part of their nature. They need a strong man to control them. And I just really resisted that idea that that's, who a people are, violent and warlike. So I would love to hear that maybe be folded in there too.
Yeah, it's not right, but again, it's the circumstances that you live in, the conditions that you live in. It might look to you as a person who live in a very peaceful life that this is violent, but over there, this is survival. And I use this example a lot of times. I mentioned it to Steve. It's kind of messed up example, but let's say you're in a prison. You cannot just say, okay, I'm going to sit in this corner and read my book. You have to join something. Otherwise, you're going to get, stabbed. So by saying that, I'm not saying you become a terrorist, but like a lot of things that may look, it's violent in the nature to you, when you live that life, that's how you just survive. And it's not saying that you are violent. All those people, if you look at them, all they want to do is take their kids to school, come back from work, watch TV, watch sports, exactly the same thing that we do over here. But the circumstances is different. I don't know if I answered your question, but I'm trying my best.
Yeah, not that it's inherent in human nature, war or violence, but the environment that certain people are in. And then of course the cycle goes on.
Yeah, a few years ago we had Hurricane Irma, coming into town, and some people were like fighting over gas, and some people were fighting over water, and we all know about the toilet paper rodeo that everyone went through during COVID. So it's the circumstances. If you let's say have no power here in the US for a month, no Wi-Fi, no internet, what do you think people is gonna do? It's not. It's
and it's 130 degrees. Like
there's big possibility that it will turn to a kind of similar to a third world country, as we call them. Is the circumstances, and to us, we looking at it from when we're comfortably sitting here, and we're looking at it through the media lens, we don't really understand what's going on until we were there.
Thank you. Such a helpful perspective. And Amanda and Chris, does either of you want to add anything to this question?
I think the book that I keep coming back to in my work and in my life is this, maybe not light my life, but this book, 2016, Sebastian Junger wrote a book called Tribe. And he talks about a lot of what's, I think is in what Ronnie just said and what's packed into this question, and kind of where he goes is the human nature is about community. And it's about, we really want community. We want that fellowship. We want that partnership. And when you look at areas that don't have that sense of community, then there are a lot of issues, both social, psychological, physical, that come with that. And so I would just encourage everyone, if you're interested in kind of learning what the effects of war and conflict has on people, that book points to it, because he follows, the military identity through that, and why do military veterans, when they leave the military, have such have a high prevalence of mental health issues, and a lot of that is that loss of community, especially in our society. American society specifically is designed to break up community in a way that other societies are not. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I thought it would be a good plug.
Such an important perspective. Yes, thank you.
It is an important point that Chris did just touch on, is that I think a lot of people don't realize how, we are the melting pot. So in that melting pot, everybody kind of considers that a positive thing, but then there is kind of the other end of the spectrum where that melting pot is breaking up the communities and stripping people of their identities or their, what they came here with, or their national, their cultures or things like that. And that does polarize.
You mean being part of the military, you're getting stripped down, or you mean people coming to the US?
No, like Chris was saying, that the way our American society is set up, and that it does kind of break down communities and everything, because we're supposed to be the melting pot. You're supposed to come here, and right. And it's not always, everybody gets together and sings Kumbaya. So it does have its positives and negatives that for us to be a melting pot.
Yeah, it's interesting, in the absence of that sense of community, that people are more and more finding it in political tribes. Okay, maybe I don't have my church group, or I can't trust my leadership, the political leadership, but I can trust my tribe and find that sense of community. I can't trust the media, all these now things that were the bedrock of our civilization. People are finding trust and connection and community in other ways. So let's go, there's a couple questions along this theme of, you've all presented sort of a united front in terms of veterans and the views and coming together around issues, specifically around Afghan refugees. But what about veterans who are vocal about not supporting our Afghan or Iraqi allies? Certainly civilians who are vocal about not welcoming foreigners. And then in connection with that, isn't it more characteristic of left-leaning veterans that they are open to new ideas and pushing for this non-polarization, and aren't more conservative veterans tending to be more polarized? I think it's important to realize that veterans are not a monolithic population, and that not all veterans feel the same way about the direction the country is going. I think more veterans voted for Trump than voted for Biden. So those are two comments and questions put into one. Would love to hear your responses to that.
I'm going to jump on this grenade for you, Chris. They're exactly right. No, not all veterans are left-leaning. I'll tell you right now, I'm not a registered Democrat. We are, our voice, in support of refugees and in welcoming these. They're absolutely correct. There are veterans out there that are like, hey, wait a minute, I'm not so sure I'm on board with this. And I know I personally am completely accepting of their reluctance, and I totally can understand their reluctance. Not every veteran had the same experience, you know, and a lot of the veterans too, which you will notice, not every veteran served in Iraq or Afghanistan. And you'll notice a lot of these veterans that are doing pushback, if you look into their background, most of them didn't serve overseas, most of them never left. But even the ones who did, I think we kind of hurt ourselves, those of us that do kind of lean to the left. We do have a lot of word usage that we use that we probably shouldn't use. I hear the words open borders thrown around all the time. I hear, you know, definitely, you know, of course, the defund the police movement. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to use better words and better terminology, because that right there is just going to polarize people. And that right there is just going to freak out the other side. There's a whole defund the police doesn't mean we're going to fire all the police and send them home. Things like open borders doesn't mean we're going to remove all of the checkpoints or all of the, you know, and just anybody can openly, freely come into our country. No, there's still extreme vetting that needs to happen. There's still, you know, background checks. There's still a lot of people just don't even understand already how vetted the population that we're bringing in, or that we're advocating to be brought in, already is. Most of these Afghans and Iraqis, you know, SIVs, have had more polygraphs and more background checks than any of your neighbors have had. So just explaining this to people usually helps. But I mean, even like they said, going back to the veterans that aren't totally on board, some of them don't even understand the full, and it's fear. It goes back to the fear of, well, who is it that we're bringing in? They could be terrorists. And it's just a matter of step by step breaking down that fear, and not getting up in their face and saying, well, you're wrong, you have no right to be afraid or no right to be against this, and explaining what actually is going on. As Ronnie said, it's a lot of just misinformation, and honestly, everything comes down to miscommunication and misunderstanding at the end of the day.
And also, if you ask those guys, maybe they have like their own personal experience was you know, not very, very pleasant, and that's understandable.
Yeah, Ronnie, I was thinking about how you said you're having to educate people. You know, we think of like, oh, you know, the Middle East is a monolithic population, they probably all think the same way. You're not. You're also having to deal with those political differences and opinions in your relationships back, you know, in that region, and having to educate them, you know, or dealing with very different viewpoints over there and at home. I don't know if there's any perspective you want to share.
No, absolutely.
Do you just feel stuck in the middle all the time?
Yeah, I'm always, you know, having be in this situation where I have to, you know, first I have to explain to myself and understand myself, you know, what's going on in both worlds. And I think pretty much you just have to listen to the person you're talking to, and, you know, find out whether this information or belief, is it from a personal experience, or is it from just, you know, watching the news and the media, which is, we all know, is very polarized. Once you identify, you know, the source of this kind of opinion or principle, you will be able to better kind of explain and understand your point, you know, with whoever, you know, that person is. So it's a matter of understanding everyone's personal, you know, experience in life.
Have you found, Ronnie, that people both back in Iraq and here at home are wanting to hear are they open to hearing about your personal experience and story?
Yeah, definitely. Most of them will be shocked. Again, a lot of times when I have conversations about situation in Iraq, you know, why did we go to the war? We shouldn't. We killed. And I'll be like, no, well, this reason. And then I'll be like, look, I served in the military. Oh, okay. So they don't want to hear immediately. If I'm anti-military, I don't want to hear from you, even if it makes sense, right? Immediately I shut off my brain. I don't want to hear from you because you are representing the military, so you have to defend them. Then I'll be like, okay, but I was born and raised in Iraq, and I was there during the war. you will see, everyone is kind of more open to you. Same thing when I go over there, when I'm kind of trying to justify or explain to some people what's going on, why is the military is doing this, what's the difference between the government and the military, the political authority and the military, how are these two have kind of different things to focus on, and usually with military you follow orders. So unfortunately, all the negative sentiment, it's mainly towards, like right now in the Afghanistan situation, not here, probably even here in the US, in the Middle East, is towards the military, not towards the political side of the issue. And I'm not blaming the government. I think people are misunderstanding in the Middle East. They don't understand the way that the things works here in the US when it comes to military and political.
Yeah, it's complicated even for those of us here, isn't it? Chris, I don't know if you had anything to add on this before we go to the next question.
Yeah, so I don't know that it was so veterans are just people, right? We're just people who decided to serve in a certain way. And I'm not sure that, and then political values are placed on top of that veteran identity, one way or the other. I'm not sure that there is such thing as a left-leaning veteran or a right-leaning veteran in the sense that is like that those two identities are wrapped up into each other. And maybe there is, and I'm not thinking of it, but we are just people who decided to serve, and we come with us. We walk through life with all the other different baggage and experiences that come with that. And I think that what would be really helpful for society is to start thinking about people and their service, irrespective of their political beliefs, right? Like people listen to me because I'm a veteran. That's not earned, right? There are people who serve their communities in ways that should be elevated far beyond my 8 years of service. I would hate to go through my life and someone, I lived 80. I'm not going to put a number. I live a good long, happy life. And the only thing that people remember me for are those 8 years when I was in my 20s, right? We are so much bigger than our service. And I just hope that our society can start valuing the other different types of ways that people serve beyond just wearing a uniform. And I'm hopeful that by doing that, we can hear different types of voices. We can hear different type of perspectives, and that way it's not dominated by a few different populations that in this moment, rightly or wrongly, are listened to more than others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are more questions that have some kind of connection to each other, but sort of going off of what you're saying. I mean, of course, we can't imagine that all veterans think this way, think a certain way politically or agree on an issue. But what's amazing is that in this hyper-polarized environment that we have, that people who might be on completely different sides of the aisle are finding consensus on an issue, even if it's just one issue, and then maybe that can be extrapolated out. But so it's not that, of course, we shouldn't refer to veterans as a monolithic or homogenous population, and there's a whole diversity of voices and opinions and political views, but might there be an opportunity here to, people are so hungry. I know, Chris, you said in an earlier conversation, what you're finding is that veterans are hungry to engage with each other, even across political divides. And if it's this issue or another issue, and that to me seemed very, very hopeful. So that sort of, let's sort of make the most of this moment of potential bridging divides and common ground. So on that question. There's one from Justin who says, thankfully, there seems to be broad bipartisan consensus on helping Afghan allies. Have you encountered any specific areas of contention that remain polarized even within this consensus? And how were you able to use your veteran experience to create agreement? So is there a particular sticking point, even on the Afghan refugee issue or on immigration, that you're finding sort of the most difficult to contend with? And then how have you been able to resolve it, or have you been able to find common ground within that?
I can just speak to this. It's related. I was on a thread today with some folks, and there's legislation that's going through Congress right now that could potentially solve a lot of the resettlement issues for these Afghans who are coming through the resettlement pipeline right now. There's 70,000 people who are coming or who have landed in the United States, and they need benefits, they need support. And the people who I was talking to are very familiar with the SIV program, and they're hyper focused on SIVs. We need to do the best we can for SIVs. It's like, okay, yes, but also there are these other people, and they're coming here and they need help. And so the legislation would essentially give a lot of benefits to those people who are coming through the pipeline that might not have otherwise qualified for the special immigrant visa program. And these veterans were very upset, and they said, well, why are we giving preference to, or why are we taking away preference from SIVs and giving, you know, these benefits to these other categories of refugees? And we had to have a really frank conversation about, number one, well, a lot of these folks probably would have qualified for the SIV program had they been given the opportunity to apply and go through it. But number two, we can't take away benefits from people and just because they came here in a different status. These people are looking for our help right now. And so, yes, we need to do all that we can to make sure that the SIV program is robust and quick, and those people who have applied for that, you know, are go through the process and get their benefits and their visa. But what are we going to do with these other 70,000 people that need our help right here and right now? They're going to need housing. They're going to need medical care. They're going to need, you know, job training. We need to help them. And so, you know, that was a very specific, I guess, area disagreement on a specific policy. But I think we really made some good progress today, at least in my little thread.
Good news. Hopefully you can build on that. Let's go to a question from David. And by the way, we just have about 10 minutes left. So if anyone does have a question they want to sneak in there, now is the time. But from David, after dealing with the immediate crisis and the need to get Afghans and Iraqis to safety and resettled in the US or elsewhere, what role can veterans play in getting the US government to fix the broken immigration system? And can we work on both simultaneously? And I know, Chris, you spoke a little bit to this in your comments. Is this sort of to most of us, the immigration system is so, it's a behemoth. We don't even, we don't engage with it. We don't understand it. We know it's broken. And yet through your work, veterans specifically, and probably other folks are directly engaging in the system and maybe learning more about it and maybe how to start fixing some of the issues, or maybe not, but would love to hear. Perhaps we'll start with you and then see if the others have comments in response to this.
Yeah, I mean, the immigration system is huge, and it can be intimidating, but every person has an on-ramp into the immigration system in their local community through the resettlement agencies, and they need your help. They want your help. They want you to get engaged, and they don't care what your background is or whether you understand the nuances of resettlement law or naturalization law. Like they need your help. And so the first thing is getting engaged with them. And the second thing is this doesn't apply to veterans, but what role can anyone play in fixing our immigration system? Well, the immigration system is just their laws and their policies. And the way to fix those is to run for office and join government and be part of the solution. One of the things that really inspires me as a veteran is when we look back at areas of significant growth in our country, they often came after times of conflict. And they came after times of conflict for the one main reason, and that was those soldiers came home, and Marines, excuse me, came home from those wars, and they got engaged in their communities. They ran for town council and school board and local assembly person. I mean, I hope everyone on here knows who their local state senator is or state assembly person is, but like we need people in those positions and at the national level as well, to help enact laws and policies that are going to make us a more welcoming country. Nothing gets done if we don't participate, and citizenship is not a spectator sport. And what being the military taught us is that if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish a lot. And so I would just encourage people just to get engaged. You don't have to run for governor to affect immigration law. Just being in the system and getting your ideas out there and helping solve problems after having really learned what those problems are through engaging the resettlement agencies, that'll go a long way.
That's wonderful. Amanda or Ronnie, did either of you want to add to that?
I mean, there are the same veterans groups that are in our coalition that are assisting, trying to help Afghans evacuate right now, are also beating on the doors of Washington right now. Huge lobbying efforts going on right now by these same veterans groups to address these immigration issues. I mean, I myself, I did my husband's visa back in 2005 at the age of 23, all by myself. No lawyer helped me, no anything. And I'll tell you right now that, I mean, I'm a native English speaker and all that stuff, and it was daunting. And all of it's kind of coming back now. I've been assisting people. People are like, oh, I'm trying to fill out this humanitarian parole application. Can you assist me with it? I'm like, yeah, no, not really, because it's confusing. It takes an Ivy League education to fill out a humanitarian parole application. Honestly, you the layperson, you cannot understand it, even to get it filled out and mailed. Just like even finding out where you're supposed to send it takes an hour. So yes, we all know that the immigration system is broken, and we are working and lobbying and proactively trying to come up with better solutions and then going back to the issue of polarization within. Yeah, we should help. You're always going to have, I like to call them the but what abouts. Yes, we should help the SIVs, but what about our homeless American veterans that are living on the street right now? And I always like to try to counter that or do that and like, oh, well, do they really deserve it? Or we want to make sure we're only bringing in the people deserve it. That kind of had in Iraq, where we're with a civil affairs team and we were going about after a firefight trying to assist people. And one of our culture advisors, we were like, oh, we're going to go assist, a group of ladies here who came up to us and said that their children are hungry and their house got bombed, whatever. And even our Iraqi culture advisor said, you really shouldn't help them because they were the ones who let Al-Qaeda stay in their house before the firefight. So you should stay away from that area of town and you shouldn't help the people over there. And I remember to this day that the major in charge said, we're going to help them, and we're not helping them because of who they are. We're helping them because of who we are. So if you want to be on a humanitarian and you want to be in this fight, you've got to stop helping people because you think they deserve it or because of who they are, and always remember that you're helping because of who you are.
That really relates to what Chris just said about that the US should be a more welcoming country. And I think that connects, and this is going to be our last question, and we will have to answer it somewhat briefly too. We have about 5 minutes, but I'd love to hear from each of you. Alan's question, that how do you see the responsibility and commitment for the resettlement of refugees as it relates to the US government and private citizens? To me, is this sort of part of the American ethic, but how do you see the responsibility and commitment for this resettlement of refugees issue? And I'd love to hear from each of you, and this will sort of be our closing also for the session.
I'll get it started.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. So the U.S. government has an obligation, not a responsibility, it's an obligation, as a moral and ethical obligation, in addition to a legal obligation, actually, for the SIVs to resettle these folks into the United States appropriately. We have an opportunity right now. We've not done a good job over the past year on this issue. We have an opportunity right now to do this well. And so what that means is funding resettlement. It means passing laws that makes resettlement easier, so that it doesn't require an Ivy League diploma to fill out a humanitarian parole application. And it's also going to require a whole of society. Government cannot do this alone. It's going to require private citizens, private businesses to get engaged, to talk to the resettlement agencies on where they need help, to hire refugees once they arrive, to put them in housing. This is a whole of society problem, and it's going to require a whole of society solution. And so America is best when we are faced with crises. And I know that we can rise to the occasion and meet this crisis head on. And so I'm very hopeful for that. And I mean, if you look no further than the Welcome.us initiative, that shows that public-private partnership that I think the Alan I think would be interested in. We really need everybody, all hands on deck moment right here to solve this going forward.
That's welcome.us. Maybe that's something we can put in the chat. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Amanda.
Sorry. I was just going to kind of build right on what Chris is saying. It behooves everybody to assist in the integration of the refugees, especially if they're coming into your community, and helping them to become self-sufficient and successful contributing members of society, and to help them, yes, kind of blend and fully integrate. I think we can really learn from the failures and the issues that we've seen with refugees in Europe, specifically the issues that they had in Germany. What happened is that the German government said, hey, we're bringing in all these refugees, and the German people weren't really super on board. And so the government said, well, we're going to put all these refugees in this concentrated one little spot. They're not allowed to go to school with the German children. They're going to have their own schools. They're not allowed to shop where the German people usually shop. They're going to have their own grocery stores. They put them almost in, these little bubbles. And what happened was nobody was interested in really integrating them. And as this went on and on and on, and they were kept in these bubbles and in this glass bowl, they revolted, as what is going to happen with people when you put them in a fishbowl and you aren't accepting of them, and you're not letting them truly become members of your society or properly integrated. You're not interested in that. You're going to see happen what happened in Germany with the refugee revolts and the protests and all that stuff. So it really is in our best interest, when these refugees are coming in, that we do actively assist in helping them integrate and helping them to rebuild their lives and become members of our society, not just living here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Fully living the American dream. So Ronnie, on that note, you are one of those people, and
yes,
would love to hear your closing thoughts.
Yeah, definitely the government are actually obligated to help those guys. And because of my experience, I'm gonna talk like specifically about war zone refugees like Afghanistan and Iraq. Definitely integration. I came here, I got help from people within the military community. Again, one of the captains that I worked with, awesome friend, I consider him my friend, my brother. He was redeployed by the time that I got my paperwork done, and he was going to be my sponsor. So I stayed at his mom's house, and she helped me out. And I funded everything, my ticket, everything to come here to the US. I was on my own. If I don't have those people in my life, I have no idea what to do. I know I had a plan to go to the military, but it's going to be very tough. Like the first time I ever got paycheck and I saw there was a tax, and I was like yelling, this is tax. This is how much they took from me. Everyone was laughing. So it's integration is the hardest part ever. But I really, really wish that the government give the military a little bit more role as far as, you know, bringing the refugees and be part of the SIV process or the immigration process, specifically from war zones that we actually fought at, because there's no one better than us military will understand how to help those people, and we understand what kind of challenges those guys have. So I wish, like the Afghanistan situation, if the military, and this is my personal opinion, I could be wrong, I think if the military was given more authority, more role as far as processing these SIV or refugees, I think we would have been in a better situation than what happened.
Although I wouldn't wish that on them either, processing the incredibly difficult procedures that it is. And maybe that's one of the lessons, is that let's simplify, let's everyone engage in that process. You know, what's amazing is that in terms of welcoming the refugees back, that's not something just the military can play a role. That's something that every American can donate the furniture, can drive them to school, can get involved, can meet them, and to make them feel welcome. And just in closing, it's been incredible to hear each of your stories, not just how each of you has served, you know, the deepest level of service overseas, but then you have come back and not just worked to make the US a more welcoming country. And I love what you said, Amanda, that it's not because of who they are, it's because of who we are. But you're also, you know, working back here at home to educate others, to simplify the process, to spread that understanding and awareness. So thank you all so much to our speakers, and thank you so much to the very lively discussion we've had on chat and in the Q&A, and to all the audience participants for taking the time out of your day and being part of this vital discussion today, and for kicking off this week's First Amendment Voice Symposium. Thank you all so much.